I'm going to actually kind of pass the mic back to you, Ryan. How did you and Mary and Surround Vision make the choices you made about what was too much to graphically show, what was just enough to graphically show, what was the important parts that people needed to hear, right? I think a big thing that we're always worried about in my line of work with creation specifically is sensationalizing or making something feel like it is being forced in an uncomfortable way on people. And it sounds like your piece struck such a delicate balance. And so would love to hear some of the choices that went on in the creation process for you all.
Sure. I mean, of course, Mary's in a better place to speak about this, as this was her baby in the kind of development of the script. But obviously, I played a role in helping usher that through. And I think, you know, the reality was, I mean, this has been one of the most remarkable projects I've had the blessing of being part of, you know, from a human rights background and engaging a completely new world of creatives and others. But what's been really lovely is how many people have come and wanting to volunteer their time from the human rights world. So we had people from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty giving us free consultancy, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, the UN and international lawyers. So, you know, with that, we were able to kind of get and figure out, you know, what are the right elements to have in the script. We also had a psychologist, Dr. Sarah Whitaker, who very kindly volunteered her time to go over the script and think through what might be overly triggering, what, you know, is going to be too much. And, you know, we had to go through the script a few times and figure out what's going to be, you know, and it's always very difficult to know until you actually have the VR, you know, and seeing what could be done. But I think the most important has always been that this has been a collaboration with Yazda, the Yazidi charity, and that we've been able to work with them every single step of the way. You know, they allowed us to have conversations with people from the community beforehand. They looked over the script during, you know, and we were able to show demos to other members of the community. And I think that's been absolutely key, that, you know, whatever we did, we had their, you know, their input and that legitimacy going forward. But I think it's been a really, you know, incredible coming together to get the right fine line that, you know, we never wanted this to be overly graphic and, you know, traumatize people in any kind of way, given the topic. But we've always been startled, like how powerful it has been, as you mentioned, just the audio, just listening to the testimony. In the VR, you just see silhouettes. You don't even see a lot of people in some of the scenes, but just listening to the audio and being able to look around and see the destruction and the fact this was, you know, this is Iraq and it's still like that today. I think
and I think Oni was starting to touch on this too. And I know I've kind of played into our next question, but you know, how important authentic collaboration is with these types of projects, right? I think so often one of the biggest issues I personally have had with the traditional documentary film world and the traditional journalism world is that it's exploitive. Oftentimes the collaboration of who's making the decisions behind the table, as they would say in production, versus who's in front of the table, who's being featured. There's such a huge disconnect between the two. I find in traditional filmmaking, traditional documentary filmmaking, I believe that industry is slowly trying to bridge the exploitation gap. Not that amazing work hasn't been done, but in my personal purview, I've seen a lot of people who don't come from that society. For example, people from America telling stories about people all over the world, but assuming they know the story once they have one interview and not actually letting there be a really clear collaborative editing process together or a very clear collaborative creation process together. And something I've noticed with more of this immersive technology is that the key authentic collaboration is so important from start to end of the creation, because the reality is you're not just editing together a film and you're not just putting together B-roll and you're not just showcasing artifacts from the future or from the past and framing them in ways you want them to be framed, but because you're giving the audience agency, you're really placing them in a space and in a time, and using that, you're not only giving power back to the audience member to make the decisions they want to make, but you're also giving power back to the creators and your collaborators that you are creating and building the space with, because it's not now about how are we framing every single little frame in our film, or how are we photographing it from this angle, or how are we writing it down from an American white perspective, which I've seen a lot nowadays, is like an anthropological perspective of human suffering or human disparity. A great example, I worked on a project about poverty in the Philippines and about children who swim to school. And instead of leaning towards poverty porn and making it about these terrible situations that these children go through because they have to swim to school and they don't have help, we decided to create an animated film that highlighted the work of a nonprofit organization who was building boats for these children. And we empowered these children through animation, not because we shied away from poverty, but because we said we want to create an immersive animated world that showcases the power and the hope and the imagination that these children have. So I think there's a lot of choices we can make. And so, Oni, I'd love to pass the mic over to you. And I'm sorry for any background noise. I'm currently in the middle of an event production for a VR project. I would love to pass the mic to you to talk about this authentic collaboration. I think specifically with the Aboriginal artists. I can't remember their name based off the top of my head, but just tell me a little bit about how that collaboration came to be and how authentically and specifically are you working with that person to make sure you all are not being the, what I like to say, you're not being the dictators of what's happening, you're being the bridge of what is created, right? I like to think of bridging together collaboration.
This is so important. And for me, this starts with the performance world. It starts with my own career as a concert pianist. And then when I launched my company, Aerial Artists, it's a defining feature of my roster, like what kind of artists I'm inviting to the roster, what kind of artists I want to send out as ambassadors to the world. And I'm not sending out artists who helicopter into the stage, deliver their performance and then vanish again. Like, that's an old model that is the epitome of kind of arrogance and like I'm the prophet of truth, colonizing message type of thing. What my artists do just in pure performance, and I'm just talking about live performance, is they are entering communities that they want to stay in for some period of time. And sure, their performance is part of their larger residency there, but they also are engaged in activities in the community, and most of those it's about what you're talking about, like collaboration and co-creation and listening, so much listening and learning themselves. So we've had artists go on artistic ambassador type tours, but a huge piece of those tours is not like, I'm an ambassador from so and so place. It's like, what do we learn here about your musical practice and your this community? And this ties in directly with the project that I'm doing with Tyson Malarin is his name, and Rick Heath, who is the former executive director of PAC Australia. That's a national performing arts organization of Australia. It's carrying over from our live performance practice into these new options with augmented reality, extended reality. The reason that I was even connected with Rick Heath in the first place, and this is like back to 2016 or something, these conversations develop organically over time. It's not like any of us like shoehorning our way in and being like, I have an idea and here's how we're going to, deliver, manipulate, process, and deliver your message. That's not really your message. It is a conversation that develops over time. And Rick Heath and I connected because of real world touring. Australia is such a, obviously it takes a lot of effort to get to the continent of Australia. And so they have, in the touring world, they have these circuits built where they'll just bring one show and tour it in every city, including like small communities, large cities, all kind of, it's like not making a distinction about where it's playing or the community that's there and what they might want or what they might need. Instead they are literally shoehorning a company into every one of these places. And so we were working on that issue in the live performance world and creating residencies that are collaborative and that empower the people that are in those communities, and it's about audience co-creation. And so that's where the conversation started. And then I met Tyson through that time, and saw some of his film work and listened to some of his performance work. And he's long been interested in technologies. He made an app himself, and has used some virtual reality stuff in his work. And so, for him, and it's something that I need to be constantly conscious of myself. Like, it's like, here are the tools that we're working on building, and do you want to use these? If so, how do you envision using these? How can these tell your story? It's like, you know, I'm just showing him this is the tool set that we have, and he's like, oh, well, interestingly, in you know, in our cultures, when one language group wants to enter the land of another language group, they go to the boundary and sit there until they're invited in. And that's very much like this 360 sphere you've created in augmented reality. So maybe we can find a way to invite people into our land if they come to this boundary, and, you know, we find them there. I mean, it's just that kind of revelation, or like, to speak to the audio component, you know, it's like, it's almost, you know, for some of these performers, their land is so essentially part of their artistic practice, that to take the work of Aboriginal artists, extract it from the land and put it on a stage is itself an act of colonization, because it takes it out of its context entirely and puts it in this like sterile context where it's removed from everything that contributes, and makes this, you know, woven tapestry of textures that contributes to the overall, all of it, all of the emotional constellation of the work. And so this technology provides a way back in. But to your point, Michaela, certainly, like, not only are we listening to Tyson very, very closely, but he himself, of course, is going and talking to the elders of his community and the elders of others of the 14 communities in the Pilbara, and listening. And this is going to be a long-term process of that unfolds as ideas come to the table, and it's beautiful, and it is a long-term thing. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how they're going to use all the technology, but that's part of the,
Thank you for sharing.
that's part of the power.